Hi. Today I would like to talk about harvesting melodic material from the jazz standard repertoire and then using that material as a source of practicing and improving instrument technique. My name's Graeme Norris. I'm teaching saxophone and improvisation here at the Jazz Music Institute in Brisbane. And here at Jazz Music Institute, we are striving to create a world where everyone can play jazz. So to be the best jazz musician that you can be, you do require a high level of instrumental technique. You also, in my opinion, need a thorough knowledge of repertoire and tunes. You need a fairly good understanding of harmony and theory and how music fits together. And I think you also need a curious and creative mind. So today I'm going to introduce you to a form of practice which you may not be familiar with at this stage. And hopefully this method of practice incorporates a few of the things that I just mentioned. So when we talk about instrumental technique or think about instrumental technique, generally we're talking about things like sound production, finger coordination, articulation, intonation, time, tempo, and also, of course, scale knowledge. And so quite often we go about improving our technique by playing scales up and down, sideways, thirds, fourths, fifths, whatever way we can, and arpeggios also. And also by working our way through the endless number of scale patterns that are out there, in books primarily, but also just things we pick up via word of mouth. So sometimes it's good to change up your routine, and also it's important to remember that we are creative human beings. We're not machines, we're not robots. So what I'm going to do today is hopefully going to show you some different methods of practicing technique and also practicing your creative technique, which I think is just as important. So what I'm going to do today is just go through maybe 2, maybe 3 tunes and pick some phrases from those tunes and then try and think of that as inspiration for some instrumental technique practice. The other advantage of doing it this way is that it helps you remember tunes, it helps you learn tunes. So the first tune I'm going to work on with you is a tune composed by Lerner and Loewe, a very well-known and well-played jazz standard titled Almost Like Being in Love. It goes like this. I'm in the key of G on the saxophone, so that's F concert. So that's the A section. This tune is in AABA form. The last A section is slightly longer than the first 2 A sections. So let's look at that very first phrase. So I'm not going to talk about chords here. I'm just talking about a melodic figure. So in the key that I'm in, basically I'm playing 3, 1, 6, 7. And then it's interesting because the next phrase is actually a sequence of that. So everything's moving down one scale tone. So that's good. So straight away my brain goes, okay, maybe I can take that first phrase through the whole scale. And then we have a pattern that I've just snitched from that song, Almost Like Being in Love, and I'm just seeing what I can do with it. So while I'm playing this, I'm thinking about fingers. I'm thinking about sound projection and sound production. I'm thinking about playing in time. And it's sort of solidifying that phrase in my brain so that when I need to play this song at a performance or on a gig or something, it's pretty solidly in my memory. So now I'm just going to say, okay, so that was the phrase. What else can I do with that? That's another version of the same phrase. So now I'm using a bit more articulation. Maybe just a complete flowing phrase now. Maybe if I tongue every note. So now I'm relying even more on articulation to create something different. I'm still playing in time, I'm still thinking about fingers. Maybe now I might invert the phrase. So now I'm ascending the first phrase and landing on the same note that I'd landed on previously. And now I'm thinking, well, maybe I can take that last note up the octave. So this is more challenging. So now we're dealing with larger interval jumps and the altissimo register on the saxophone. So as you can see, just by taking one simple phrase like this, it's generating a whole lot of other stuff, and it does not feel mechanical. If I was practicing scale patterns, I'd probably be reading from a book, at least for the initial idea. Whereas this one, I'm just thinking of a phrase, working on a tune, and then seeing what I can do with it. And so it develops my own creative vocabulary. So let's move on to the phrase in the bridge. So the bridge goes. I'll do that again. So that's a beautiful and clear 2-5-1 phrase. So on the saxophone, the bridge moves into the key of E major. So I'm playing a 2-5-1 in the key of E major, F sharp minor, B7, E major. So straight away I'm thinking, okay, that's a beautiful 2-5-1 phrase. I know that I need to be able to play 2-5-1s in more than one key. Let's try playing that same phrase in some different keys. So I thought, okay, I could just play chromatically like I was sort of doing before, or, you know, that's a fairly regular way of playing scale patterns, is to do them chromatically. But this time I thought, look, I'll just take everything up in minor thirds, just for the fun of it, but also it's a fairly common way of moving through a musical progression. And also it really gets me working in, you know, keys that are quite different. I mean, they move from fairly easy keys to quite difficult keys. So just then I ended up in the key of D flat on the saxophone. So I started in E, then I went to the key of G, then I went to the key of B flat, and then I've ended up in the key of D flat. So when I'm playing in the key of D flat, I'm working in a key that I don't usually play in, and I'm having to think about alternative fingerings. Fingering choices on the saxophone. See, I've got a choice for a G flat. I've got two different choices for G flat. I've got different choices for B flat as well. And so it makes me think about, okay, let me play all the fingering choices I've got. So I played the same phrase with different fingering choices, and that makes me think, okay, it makes me more comfortable with making choices about which fingerings to use, and it makes me more comfortable about using those fingering choices. So once again, you can see just by taking a simple phrase, an organic phrase, a phrase that is sourced from a well-played and well-known jazz standard, generates all these ideas for me. And I'm working on my technique, which is important. Okay, so let's look at another song, and just for the sake of it, let's try it on a different horn. So this is the soprano saxophone, and this is sort of good actually because this is a horn that I've only recently purchased. So I'm sort of working on my technique. For those of you who are familiar with soprano saxophones, you do know that there is a bit of an issue with intonation with some soprano saxophones. So this is good. So I'm going to continue in much the same vein as what I did before. So we're going to work on this tune, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So that is, of course, Take the A Train by the great Billy Strayhorn. So this one, you know, it's a fairly stark version of an arpeggio, right? A triad, in fact. So this one's a good vehicle for practicing triad work. So now I'm ascending chromatically, which straight away gives me all these different fingerings to think about, as well as thinking about the theory of the notes that I'm playing. And, you know, that first phrase, that makes me think of this. So now I'm practicing rising fifths through a triad, as well as thinking about my tongue, hitting the reed at the right time, and my fingers, trying to keep my fingers relaxed. Another one would be, you know, a great old tune called These Foolish Things Remind Me of You. That's the opening phrase of These Foolish Things Remind Me of You. So this is more scale, okay? So I'm playing 1, 2, 3, 1, 6, 1 in the key of E flat concert, F on the saxophone. So if I think to myself, okay, that's pretty easy in that key, but if I take it up a half step, all of a sudden I'm working in the key of F sharp, which is a key that we don't really work in too often. All right, let's try another song. This is one of my favorites. This is a great old tune called These Foolish Things Remind Me of You. So that's the opening phrase with a little bit of creative, input from me. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the opening phrase, really. That's how I'd play it. So I'm in the key of F on the saxophone. So now I'm in the key of E flat concert, and I'm playing. It's a very scalar melody, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 6, 1, basically. Whereas the other two songs I've played so far have been more sort of in the arpeggio area. So this is 1, 2, 3, 1, 6, 1. So in that key, that's not too bad. That's pretty easy phrase. So if I take it up a half step, suddenly I'm in the key of F sharp on the saxophone. And F sharp, that's a key that not many jazz musicians play in on a regular basis. So straight away I think, okay, fingerings. So I'm dealing now with an A sharp, so I think to myself, what's the best fingering for the A sharp? And then to practice that, to get that smoother, I might do something like over and over and over, and try and get my fingers a little looser. And so the soprano has its own challenges fingering-wise too, as well as intonation. So that gives me some ideas, so I can practice different fingerings. Front fingering, side fingering. For saxophone players, you'll know what I'm talking about. Let's move to the key of A flat. So now I'm using my side fingerings. Same phrase, just saying, okay, what can I do with it? And it's my experience that once you start thinking like this, a whole world opens up. You're not reading something from a book. You're not reading something or practicing something that someone told you to practice. You're just working on a song and then seeing what you can do with it and treating that as a way of getting better on your instrument. So today we've just dealt with 3 songs briefly, just so I can give you an idea of what this concept is about. And these 3 songs have been songs that were composed in, the 1920s, 1930s, I believe. So once you start getting into the pool and library of songs that were composed in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, the bebop tunes of the 40s and 50s, where there's a lot more notes and the rhythms are a lot more complex. If you start doing this sort of thing with them, then the practice becomes more difficult, but it is really, really good for your technique. So, like with all of this stuff, it's a gradual process. You be patient, you work forward, small steps, you do it regularly, and you will see some results. Okay, thanks for listening today. That's where we'll leave it at this point. So I encourage you to experiment and try some of these ideas that I've introduced you to today. And in so doing, if you if you make any discoveries of your own or you've got any ideas, we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.